to talk a little bit with Mrs. Thelma White and Reverend Kevin Haynesworth. He is the pastor now of Christ Community Baptist Church in Philadelphia. We have a scholarship called the Arthur White Scholarship. And Mrs. White is the widow of the late Reverend Dr. Arthur R. White. And so we thought we'd take a few moments just to get a sense of who Arthur White was. And so the goal today is just to get a little more information. Since he's no longer with us, now we have an opportunity to get to know him through his successor, Reverend Haynesworth, and through his wife, Thelma White. So I thought I'd ask a few questions. It's also Black History Month, and I thought it would be really great to have some insight into Reverend Dr. White. So with that, let me begin with a couple of general questions for both of you. For both of you first, and Mrs. White, I'll ask you first. Do you have any memories, particular memories that are fond as you think about Reverend White?
The first thing that comes to mind is I think about when we first met. I was a student at Virginia Union. We were both on campus for a year before we met. I had two friends who were in seminary with him, and they decided that we were the perfect couple for each other. They decided that they would arrange a Friday night meeting while I was on a switchboard and he was on his way to work, so they invited him to come by. And my first thoughts of him were that he thought a lot of himself. And as he came in, I remember he had on a white coat. And me being a girl from Virginia, I figured anybody wearing a white coat was a doctor, which meant that he was too old for me, so automatically I wasn't interested. But 50 years this year, 3 daughters lately, and 4 grandchildren. So evidently we were a match for each other.
So your friends had it right.
My friends, his friends, yeah.
His friends had it right.
They had it right. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. God is always at work, isn't he? In sometimes strange ways.
Strange ways.
Reverend Haynesworth, some of the memories, what memories come to mind for you?
Well, one of my fondest memories of Pastor White, and one thing about Pastor White is that he was always working and preparing for ministry. He was working in the ministry in front of the congregation and behind the scenes. And one of my fondest memories of Pastor White is one year, it was during the week when we were doing some cosmetic upgrades in the sanctuary. Pastor White and I were actually painting the back wall of the pulpit, the wall behind the pulpit. And I was standing on the ladder, and we had finished painting. The painting actually had dried. We were actually hanging a portrait on the back wall. I was standing on the ladder, and Pastor White was at the bottom of the ladder, bracing the ladder that I was on top of. And I remember distinctly looking back and looking down, and watching Pastor White bracing the ladder that I'm standing on the top of. And it became a pictorial metaphor for all that Pastor White has been in my life. I even today, in ministry, I'm standing on his shoulders. Yeah. He was one who didn't just teach and train, but he taught and trained while he was walking it out himself. I remember him as a man of immense integrity, and one of the things that he would put on the walls throughout the church is always have a ministry. And so that's one of my fondest ministry of Pastor White.
Well, you describe him as your father in ministry. And I think is there anything you'd add to that about what that meant to you personally?
Yeah. Looking back, and even today, I'm still looking back and looking down and seeing Pastor White bracing the ladder for me. He braced me in ministry. He trained me to be in ministry. He trained me to minister in the good times and bad times and in different times, no matter who or what you're coming up against. Just keep on doing ministry. And you remind us that, we're going to have difficult times. We're going to have tough times. And but never stop being a servant of the Lord, and never stop looking to see how you can represent Christ wherever you are and whatever you're up against. Whatever the challenge is, Dr. White, he didn't just teach that, he lived it, he walked it out. And he's doing that for me today.
Well, in our conversations before, I mean, the stories you guys were telling me about how dedicated he was to ministry, that was a powerful commitment that he had to his people. I read a comment after his passing, and someone wrote an email comment and put it, I think, on a website. I forgot what it was. Maybe the pastors' conference that you guys were at. And a person said, I've been a member of this church for many years, and the one thing I remember most about Dr. White is that he created a caring community.
Oh, yes.
And I think to myself, what a wonderful legacy. We're talking 39 years of faithful ministry at Christ Community Baptist Church. That's quite a legacy. Mrs. White, I wanted to ask you, I don't want to miss the opportunity to hear you tell the story that you know about how Dr. White came to know the Lord. What's the story?
Well, the story that he shared with me was he was in BTU training out in Los Angeles.
What is BTU?
Baptist Training Union.
Okay. Baptist Training Union.
He spent, I think it was a week in that kind of like a convention, and he drove. So first of all, that tells something about him from California, from Los Angeles to Louisiana, and he said he was in the conference and singing. I don't remember what the song was, but they were singing, and he was singing, and he said he plainly heard the Lord say, "You're going to preach my word." And he said it was so just so real, and so that he knew at that moment he had to preach.
So it was a clear calling of the Lord.
Clear calling, and I believe that he tried his very best, as much as he could, to live out that calling, because that calling was so personal to him. And I always felt that no matter what else was going on, he went where he was needed, and he didn't hesitate. It didn't, as I shared with you, it didn't matter what time of day it was, or night it was, or whatever else was going on at home, or personally with him. When the call came, he responded, and often he responded before the call came, because if he knew of anybody, as I said, it didn't matter whether it was a church member, or he would go to the hospital and visit people that didn't even know him. Or we would go to the hospital together sometimes, and to see a member, and he'd end up praying for the member in the next bed or down the hall. So he was always 24/7. He was on the call.
A true pastor. I think it's probably worth noting that we have a portrait of him sort of in the preaching moment, it looks like. And then Christ Community Baptist Church, there's a portrait there. So just to make sure we identify that as we move along. One of the things that has intrigued me about his story is that he was involved in the civil rights movement and civil rights issues. And I want to open that question for both of you. Mrs. White, you care to comment on the kinds of things that he was involved in that come to mind?
When we first came to Philadelphia in 81, the school board, the schools were on strike, and he met someone who seeing it on the news, and then he met someone who told him, that they needed as many people as possible to join them in the strike to fight for the children. That was a Thursday evening, I believe, and I turned the news on. Who do I see carrying a banner? He's carrying, so he had gone downtown, joined the group that was picketing for the schools to open. He was not right there. Barely knew anybody, and they didn't know him, but he was right there. Cared about the children.
So he wasn't afraid to stand up for issues that concern the community.
No, he wasn't, and he wasn't afraid to stand up for right wherever he was, and regardless of who was in opposition of what he thought. If he thought it was right, and he could back it up with in the Bible, he had a scripture ready for you. So, yeah.
So his motivation was ultimately, he felt there was a biblical
Yes.
motivation
Most definitely.
for addressing civil rights issues in his community.
Yes, and he was very active in the church community.
Yeah, absolutely. As Sister White was saying, Pastor White was a catalyst for change, for social justice, for civil rights. His theology, liberation theology, was very much a part of his calling, and everything that he taught, everything that he preached, liberation theology was in there. And Genesis 1:26, where he was a firm believer that God never gave man dominion over other men, and it came through everything that he did. His younger brother, Reverend K. Donald White, often told a story of their childhood, of their teenage years, and I believe Pastor White was going into high school while Reverend K. Donald White was still just elementary, not even in middle school yet. And K. Donald White, Pastor White never tells this story, but K. Donald White tells this story about how he broke down barriers for him. Arthur White broke down barriers for K. Donald White. So 11 years before K. Donald White made it, Arthur White was there. So he took the brunt of racial discrimination, even physical assaults and verbal assaults, when he was the first black going into an integrated high school.
Oh, wow.
And Pastor White never tells this story, but K. Donald White tells it all the time as a badge of honor for how his older brother paved the way for him. And you can tell that those years in Pastor White's life made an indelible impression on his life because he taught liberation. He taught that God wanted all men free and all men liberated, and that was very much a part of his ministry and a part of his life.
I think it's a really important part of the legacy is that this is a man who stood for justice.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
And a biblically based justice, which I think is marvelous. Well, I want to be mindful of our time, but I wanted to just ask, just at a personal level to each of you, how can we at Missio pray for you? I know, Mrs. White, that the loss is heavy. And so how can we pray effectively for you at this point?
My goal might sound a little bit selfish, but it's still in connection with what my husband and I were doing in our ministry. I want to get my degree in counseling. There are a lot of people out there who wear the mask. You see the smile and you see the so-called happiness, and inside they're dying. If I can prepare myself to be able to be out there for others, to talk to them, to show them that there is a way through Jesus. If you would pray for me to be able to fulfill that goal, then I can pick up some of where my husband left off. Also, we have 3 daughters and grandchildren who are still struggling. So We all need prayer.
Tina, Kimberly, and Ashley. I've had a conversation with Tina, and I thought, wow, what a great lady she is. I really enjoyed my chat with her. I hope to have more conversations with her as well. So we'll pray for you and your ministry future, and particularly in counseling. In the light of the impact of COVID, I mentioned to you earlier, or I've mentioned it in the past, that there's a lot of struggle that people are having in the wake of COVID. And so I think there are few things perhaps more important than being able to minister to people as they're struggling in the midst of a difficult time. So we'll remember that. We'll remember also Tina, Ashley, and Kimberly. Things we can pray about for you. You've assumed a new, different leadership role.
Absolutely.
At Christ Community Baptist Church. So are there things we can pray for you?
Yeah. Well, it's not an easy task to come behind Reverend Dr. Arthur R. White, and Pastor White has pastored Christ Community for 39 years. I'm thankful to be a part of 36 of those 39 years with Pastor White and Sister White. But the prayer for us and for Christ Community is that the Lord would help us to bridge the ministry gap. There's a large gap left in Pastor White's departure because he was larger than life, and his ministry, he could be a one-man ministry by himself. He has a great group of faithful servants and leaders at Christ Community, and the doors of the church are still open. The church is still in the midst of mourning Pastor White's departure, just as Sister White and the family and all of us are. So we need the Lord's help to bridge the ministry gap, to honor the Lord and even to honor Pastor White, who always trained us to never stop having the ministry, even in his departure. I'm actually loving your spirit, the way you're talking about this man who has been so influential in your life, and truly humble and recognizing his legacy. But the Lord has called you, yes, sir,
to lead.
Absolutely.
And so we'll pray for you and the church as you move into the future. It's really important. Thank you both for your time and your willingness just to talk a little bit about the legacy of this dear man. Reverend White was a graduate of Missio Seminary. It was previously Biblical Seminary. The name changed over the years to Missio Seminary. Last year, I received a letter. It was one of the most extraordinary letters I've received in my life. It was a letter from a white couple in Philadelphia. And they had been listening and thinking about all of the things that have transpired in the last several years, particularly in the wake of the George Floyd killing. And they wrote me a letter, and in some, they said, we want to establish a scholarship that will serve the African American community well. I was stunned. I've never received a letter quite like this. And I thought what I would do to close off here is just to read what the inspiration was for the Arthur R. White Scholarship, designed to minister especially to African American students here at Missio Seminary. The letter begins, "The desire of our hearts is to help bring more of God's flourishing and peace on earth as it is in heaven. We acknowledge our inability and failure to adequately and lovingly see, understand, and respond to the unjust systemic racism and the resulting disparities that exist in our world, our country, and city. We hope that this scholarship fund will encourage Black Philadelphians through the work of gospel ministry. We believe this is one thing we and Missio can do to respond to the unjust disparities that at their root have resulted from personal and systemic racism and injustice. I have never received a letter like that before. It touched me so incredibly deeply that this is a couple who wants to remain anonymous, but who wants to serve particularly the church in Philadelphia. And so what they have done, they gave an initial $100,000 for a scholarship. And the result is that they will match every $100,000 that we raise up to $500,000. That is the Arthur R. White Scholarship. And it's in his honor, and it appreciates the legacy that the two of you have described already. So we are proud that we have this scholarship, and we look forward to serving many in the city of Philadelphia with this scholarship. Thank you both again for your time.
Thank you.
God bless.
God bless you as well.